Thanks. Good afternoon, or morning, or evening, wherever in the world you're joining us from. My name is Blaine Rushak. I'm the president of the PhD Project. Thank you for joining us for the second in our webinar series about equity, inclusion, and diversity in business. We have a great conversation in store with you with some amazing speakers. So I think you're going to enjoy this hour, and we're going to leave you wanting more. A little bit before we head into session, just a little bit about the PhD Project, which is co-sponsoring this event. Since its founding in 1994, we have been able to increase the number of diverse faculty from under 300 to over 1,600 faculty and students that have gone through the program. So we've made a big impact in the business space in terms of African American, Hispanic, and Native American faculty members. We firmly believe that increasing diversity in the classroom leads to increasing diversity in the business space. Our PhD project faculty and students are making a difference on campus, with students, with universities, and in communities, as example by this webinar series that members are participating in. So we know you're going to enjoy the session. Two things. If you're really interested in potentially pursuing your PhD and becoming an influencer in the college space, please log on to our phdproject.org site and learn how you can be part of the PhD project. Or if you love what you hear today and think, I want to be part of that PhD project program as a sponsor, either if you're a corporation or association, same thing, log on, find our contact information. We'd love to talk to you about being part of our amazing program that is now in its 26th year and building. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our amazing facilitator and moderator, Sasha Thompson, who's the founder of the Equity Equation. This is my second time working with Sasha, and I just know you are in for an amazing hour. So I'm going to turn it over to Sasha for our Changing Corporate Culture. It's not just about Black History Month. Sasha, all yours.
Thank you so much, Blaine. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I am thrilled to be here with you today. As Blaine said, this is going to be an amazing session with three people that I have just thoroughly enjoyed preparing for this this webinar for. And so I want to do some quick bios of them before we dive in. So our first panelist is Dr. Anthony Hood, who serves as the Executive Vice President and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for First Horizon Bank. In his role, he leads the development and execution of firm-wide strategy for embedding DEI into the DNA of the organization. He previously served as the Director of Civic Innovation in the Office of the President at UAB, as well as an Associate Professor of Management at the Colott School of Business at UAB. Dr. Hood received his undergrad and MBA from UAB. And in 2019, Dr. Hood was honored by the UAB's Alumni Association with the prestigious Distinguished Alumni Award. Thank you, Dr. Hood. Welcome to this panel. Our next panelist is Carolynn Johnson, who is the Chief Executive Officer for DiversityInc Media, LLC. Before she was CEO, she was the company's COO and Chief Revenue Officer for the past 16 years. During which she was responsible for operations, all major corporate partnerships, web properties, and events. She was also responsible for sales management, information technology, circulation, business development, and the development and execution of the annual DiversityInc Top 50 competition. That's a lot of stuff. Carolynn completed her executive management program at the Tuck Business School at Dartmouth College and earned an MBA from Rutgers Business School. Welcome, Carolynn. And Janet Stovall. Janet is the Senior Client Strategist at NeuroLeadership Institute, a global think tank, consultancy, and research organization that uses neuroscience to improve business performance. She previously served as Manager of Executive Communications for UPS and serves as the primary speechwriter for the company's CEO and senior leaders. She holds a bachelor's degree in English from Davidson College in Davidson, North Carolina, a master's in professional studies in integrated marketing communications from Georgetown University, and serves as a member of Davidson's Commission on Race and Slavery. I am honored and excited to be moderating this panel today. So let's begin. So we are in the final days of Black History Month 2021. And in some instances, not much has really changed. We see the honoring of prominent Blacks throughout the history of America. We've seen companies make the same or slightly updated statements they made last year about the importance of Black history, and a few other things that just, status quo. But I did notice a few changes this year. I saw a call for change beyond the stale statements of yesteryear, a call for investing in Black communities, supporting Black businesses and Black employees, a challenge to honor Black history 24/7, 365. Carolynn, so at DiversityInc, what are you seeing? Are you seeing this same shift?
Well, I first want to say thank you to the team at the PhD Project for hosting this event, for seeing it not robbery to invite me to speak as one of the panelists, and to my co-panelists. I'm really looking forward to our talk today. As it relates to answer your question, as it relates to whether or not I'm actually seeing any change, I'm not sure I can say it's change. I see a lot of activity. Okay. But activity in the ways of people are requesting the survey. People are doing work that they know they should have been doing a long time ago. Rolling out a different welcoming mat to people who they actually want to work at a company. But as far as real, actionable, sustainable, irreversible change, unfortunately, I cannot say that I have seen that. On a positive note, though, I have to say that I am seeing change from real leaders. We were talking pre-call about Stevie Wonder's comments about leaving and going to Ghana to protect his grandchildren from racism. And if I think about his journey up until this point, starting his career in entertainment at 11 years old as a blind young Black boy, the fact that he has had enough and he is now vocal about it, that is the type of change that I want to see. If companies won't do it, we have to, and that's positive change.
Thank you. You know what, we'll get to that later because, we were talking about some stuff earlier. Now, I definitely want to bring that up. Janet, you are in a communications role, right? You've been in communications in your career. And, I was in marketing prior to starting my own business. And one of the things that I constantly struggled with was doing the PR talk of what we're doing in this space versus actually marketing what we were actually trying to do and accomplish, right? There was this battle. And so what are you seeing now that you haven't seen before as it relates to Black History Month and what these companies are committing to?
Well, the conversations are a little bit tougher, a little bit edgier. People are stepping out and saying some things they hadn't said before. And like Carolynn said, they may not be doing anything different, but they're actually saying it. One thing I think that's interesting is the word equity has crept into our lexicon now. It used to be equality, but equity has crept in. Now, I don't think people really know what the difference is between those, because when we talk about equality, equality is a wonderful aspirational goal. We all want that. But if you think about the country that we're in, the world that we're in, especially in the United States, and you think about what our history is, equity is either an impossible goal, it ain't gonna happen, because people started at different places and we're not doing catch up. Or if you truly believe that it's there, then, God made us all equal, so we're already equal. So either way, either has happened or it isn't going to happen. But the bottom line is, so equality is not something we should reach for. Equity is something, though, you with intention, you can actually make happen. But the challenge is people now are throwing that word around. So there's some people are seeing the difference, but they're not really wanting to do what that word requires, because equity, let's face it, we have for years talked about how diversity and inclusion were not a zero-sum game. Yes, they are. To a certain extent, they are. If somebody owns 90% of all the stuff, somebody else got 10% of all the stuff, then you know what? Somebody got to give up something on the 90% side. The reality and the joy and the promise of diversity is that if you have diverse, innovative companies, they create more stuff. So everybody gets more. But the trick is equity sometimes in the beginning looks like somebody has to give something up and people don't like it. So the conversations are very aspirational still, but what you're finding out is all those great pledges for equity and change, and we're going to level the playing field, that was really good about a year ago. But then COVID put everybody down and it killed some of that momentum. And now what you've got are employees coming back saying, okay, well, what you said was this. So where are we? What happened to the pay equity studies you did? What happened to this? Where are they? What are we seeing? So I think the conversation is continuing, but I think the conversation is being led by the people who were told what to expect. So it's edgier, and people are just wanting to see companies stand up to what they said they were going to stand up to.
So it's a level of accountability, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Carolyn's point, the problem is a lot of companies jumped out there with these great statements without any real sense as to how they're going to make them happen. The thing is, if it was easy, you should have been doing it all the time. And so if you just figured out you need to do some of this stuff, the question is, when you get out and make a statement that we're going to do this, I mean, we can't all be Ben and Jerry's. I know that. But on a scale of, I don't know, Facebook and Ben and Jerry's, where does your company sit in the middle of that? And the bottom line is you can make all the promises in the world. If you don't have a structure, processes, commitment from the top, and accountability to make it happen, it is just a nice thing to say.
Thank you. Thank you. And Anthony, when we spoke earlier, we were talking about how Black History Month has always been about, there's this history, there's this struggle, right? What would you tell companies? And especially, you're in a very unique place because you're teaching, but you're also in a corporate situation. And so what would you share with these companies on how to approach Black History Month moving forward?
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, the conversation has gotten off good already. Janet, Carolyn, I love your energy. I'm sitting on my hands. I want to jump in. Yeah, and I want to piggyback on what Janet was saying because, this past week we saw the culmination of us taking a 1-ton car, launching it out into space. It traveled for 203 days and they parked it on another planet called Mars. It traveled almost 300 million miles. Somebody made a decision that we need to go to Mars and we're going to send a car there, a rover, and we did it. We made it so. When the coronavirus hit, Black people have been talking about reparations for years and people said, well, how are we going to pay for that? But then we found $2.2 trillion in a matter of 2 weeks, and we about to spend another 1.9 trillion, if that comes to an agreement. Or this Operation Warp Speed, what normally takes several years and billions of dollars to develop one drug, we got like 5 or 6 drugs developed in a matter of a few months. So what that shows me is that if you have intentionality, you can do anything. You just have to want to do it. We're all in a space where people say, well, Anthony, this DEI is so hard. Well, yeah, sending a car to Mars is hard. Well, we do the hard things every day. So we can fix DEI. And so for me, in my role, I'm clear to make these distinctions between diversity oftentimes is about representation of different identity groups, sexual orientation, gender, race, people of different abilities. But you will never have a diverse environment if you don't have what Janet talked about, and that's equity. And I think within an organization, now, as a society, I don't know if we're ever going to get to a place where things are going to be equitable. But inside a company, I don't understand how you can justify paying a woman 81 cents for a job that you pay a man $1 for that same job with the same background, same expertise. Like that just should not happen. And if you don't have an equitable environment where people have equal opportunity to development, equal opportunity to promotion, to go into training or what have you, to stretch assignments, that stuff we can fix. Yeah. We can reduce those disparities. And if you have an equitable environment, it makes it easier to attract and retain diverse talent. And then you have to have inclusion. people need to feel like they can be their authentic self at work, that they belong, that they're satisfied, that they don't have to deal with microaggressions from their colleagues or even customers in this instance. You know, I just started growing my hair. The last time I got my haircut was March 9th before the world shut down last year. I've always wanted locks. But for so many years, I just didn't do it because everybody tells you like, well, that could be something that can hinder, you know, your upward progression. And so I used COVID as an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to go for it. And I grew my beard out and I got my little white hairs coming in right here. And I'm so thankful for so many people that fought for that equity around hair and how you present yourself at work vis-a-vis the Crown Act, because now I can be my authentic self at work. And so I stand on the shoulders of giants who have fought for that work. So as it relates to Black History Month, to your point, it should not be about the struggle. It should be about our resilience, in my opinion. We do need to pay homage to the ancestors and what they went through. But man, we have come a long way and we are making strides as evidenced by all of us that are on this call. And we just need to keep the momentum going. And I think that should be the focus of a lot of our Black history programming. It is about the overcoming the resilience that our people have and continue to display as we go forward.
I think
I was about to say, I know Carolyn looked like she wanted to jump in, and Janet.
Let's go, Carolyn.
So I just have to say, I first of all, I love your hair, and you know, do that thing with the beard. Looks great on you, okay? But I wanted to say, like, this whole conversation around Black History Month. How about Black reality now, right? Can we just not focus on all the things that happened? Like, can we talk about what's happening now that shouldn't be happening? Can we talk more about what isn't happening that should be? And I think the way that you get to that equity is through truth telling. Anthony talked about, you know, pay inequity. And I think truth telling comes by the 90, those who have the 90, telling the truth about what went wrong. And I will give you an example. Unfortunately, last week, we lost a giant on this topic. And that was Arnie Sorensen. He was the CEO of Marriott International. And he told the truth when it came to why he was named CEO of Marriott. He didn't talk about it because he was just so great and prepared and ready to lead. He said, I didn't get this job because of experience. They looked at my opportunity to lead. And that's what I'm going to do for women and people of color in my workforce. He told the truth. How do we get there? We tell the truth about what went wrong. And dare I say, I hate the phrase, but I'm going to use it right now. We lean into being part of the solution. That's the how.
Right, and you talk about, you know, Black History Now. I was talking to Sasha and I said, what about, instead of Black History Month, how about Black Future Month? How about we celebrate and start talking about this time next year, this is where we're going to be. This is what we as organizations are doing to create a future for, but we all know how we got here. And we need to be aware and we need to be educated because it explains stuff. And we need to celebrate. But that's our celebration. We don't need the rest of the world going back to that, because that's actually easier. That's easier because the fact that we survived, all we've survived, really, really, really says we are resilient. And so we know that. But the question is, how are you going to funnel that resilience into what we can do? Mm-hmm. If we back there, we just stay right here. So how are we going to? I want to see Black Future Month. That's the one I want to do. And I want it to be more than 1 month too. And I don't want it to be the shortest month in the year.
365.
Yeah. Can I piggyback one more thing?
Go for it.
That's why intersectionality is so important. Because right now we're planning out our programming for Women's History Month in March. And we're going to talk about Black women and how, you know, the struggles that Black women have and their lack of representation and their lack of protection and things like that. And when we get into Pride Month and LGBTQ and veterans. And so there are a lot of different ways that throughout the year is Black History 365 and not just relegated to the shortest month of the calendar.
Exactly.
Thank you. You know, as you all are talking, and I'm totally going off script, but this is kind of where it's going for me is, you know, as we talk about the future, I think what's interesting, we talk about Black History Month and again, right, what happened in the past? Oh, this was then. And we know that some of that is even not the true history, right? What we're taught is not necessarily what actually happened. And so it's revision. There's some revisions that have taken place. And so as I'm thinking about this, and as we're talking about the current state and we're talking about the future, I'm also thinking about how we take this beyond just what the conversations we're having with our employees, right? How does this impact the industry? How does this impact the industry we're in? And I was talking to a client earlier today. I was doing a workshop today around healthcare. And they were talking about Black History Month and saying, you know, oh, it was great. We learned all this Black history. And I'm like, how does that impact healthcare? Like, let's talk about that. And they hadn't even made that connection of some of the atrocities that have happened in healthcare around race, gender, sexual orientation, et cetera, et cetera. And so as we're talking, and I know as we were planning for this, we talked about this in the space of, let's just use financial services, right? Finances as an example. And so, you know, Anthony, when you and I spoke, we talked about the history of banking and understanding if you're going to talk about Black history, let's talk about it around banking and why Black communities operate the way that they do around banking, right? And that's something that as an industry that can be tackled. Talk to us a little bit more about that and use that as an example of how we can take this Black history beyond just a speaker or, you know, an event.
Yeah, I think it's just like Janet and Carolyn mentioned, we have to talk about how we got here. And we need to talk about how these things are still occurring. And, so when you think about banking, you can't talk about today's banking environment without talking about redlining and how, the government actually drew lines around communities that they thought were not safe for investment, which impacted banks. Banks had to they were incentivized to only lend in communities where they could be insured. And so that drove, decades and decades of wealth creation or the lack thereof. And so when we talk about inclusive banking and low to moderate income communities and Community Reinvestment Act, those things aren't just here because, Black people are inferior or we lack financial literacy. These things were perpetuated by a confluence of government policy, but also corporate policy, our faith communities because they were complicit in it, and even what we consider today our nonprofit organizations. And so it was those organizations in concert that created the environment that we have right now. And so I think those are things that we have to keep in mind. I've given presentations before I got into banking to other bankers. And I remember one I did about 2 years ago, and I had a banker tell me after the event, I gave a presentation on redlining. He said, I've been in banking for almost 20 years. I'd never heard of redlining. And I'm like, how does that even occur? Like when I think like bankers should have like continuing education, right? Like they should have like mandatory ethics training. And part of your ethics training, everybody's talking about ESG now, environmental, social, and governance. Like all of those things, the history of where we got here should be involved in that. I came from UAB, a healthcare institution. And so to your point, Sasha, when we talk about Black history, we need to talk about the Tuskegee experiments. I'm from Alabama, so you can't go anywhere in Alabama and not hear about the Tuskegee experiments, which now that's having an impact now on people's, getting the vaccine and things like that, or their reluctance to do so. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I think that goes, yep, go ahead, Janet.
You started off talking about healthcare. I mean, and Anthony came back after that. Think about this. One of the issues we're having with the COVID vaccinations is, there is I was on a call with some speechwriters yesterday, and the guy worked with a hospital. And he goes, well, we're dealing with this Black hesitancy. And this other woman jumped in before I had a chance to, and she said, no, don't call it that. She said, because you're framing it like Black people are hesitant without good reason. And I said, yeah, let's try vaccine suspicion. I like that word better. But I go back to, if you think about it, when we talk about what we don't learn in history, we don't learn about the Flexner report. We don't learn about the fact that there used to be a bunch of Black medical schools. There aren't that many now. You know why? Because somebody came in and said they're not up to standard. We need to follow medical school standard. They closed them all. And then the white medical schools wouldn't accept Black doctors. So what we have now is a huge shortage of Black doctors. It's not that Black folks can't get through medical school. It's not that Black folks don't want to go to medical school. It's that you have a historical lapse there. And the problem is, I always call it my journey of why. whenever somebody says to me, well, I really don't understand this situation. Why do Black people live in the inner city? Why is healthcare so bad? Why? I say, okay, let's start asking why. Why are there no Black doctors? Well, because not medical school. Why? Well, why? Well, because they couldn't get in. Why? And I'll just go back. And eventually you get to it. And to me, that is history's role. And that's what they ought to be doing in school, taking everybody in their journey of why. Now, what you do about it, I don't know, but it certainly makes it a whole lot easier to have a conversation about equity when you can trace things and they don't become moral failures of a people. Because nobody could have survived what we survived and be morally inept.
Yes.
You don't stay alive through what Black people have gone through without having a resilience and a power and an intelligence and a grit and all those things. So I don't believe that it makes no sense that some of these things are there other than the fact that somebody intentionally put things in place for them to be there. And the hope is if you put it there, you can take it away.
Yeah. And I will take the baton from you on that, Janet, because when we are asking why, right, we are really good, especially in healthcare and financial services, at measuring, right? We know exactly how much time as consultants we can spend on something before it is no longer profitable or until we get to a place of profitability. And so the intentionality has to come with measurement, right? And so we have to force organizations to measure and then be transparent with their findings, not what it is they want to share, but what they need to share that will allow us to get to the why so that we can ultimately get to the never again. And so I think that is a huge part of this. A lot of organizations, when we talk about what's different, they're coming out with these, diversity reports or transparency reports or, data in transparency. And I can honestly say as the CEO of DiversityInc, no, I will be the judge of that. Because if you cannot tell me what your promotion rates are, what your new hiring rates are, what your turnover looks like, even during a pandemic, well, then I will tell you, sir or madam, it is not good enough. And so let us not allow people to woo us away from the truth with a magic show in a report around transparency when it is anything but. So I love that. We will keep asking why, and we will tell them what it is that we need to see so that we understand why and what they need to understand. And last but certainly not least, there's this feeling talking about this subject that I have not had in a very long time. And when we think about the responsibility of all involved, right, there's a willingness to be measured. There's a willingness to own your part in it. But for us, the impacted during Black History Month, we have to approach this subject with a level of feeling that we were not comfortable talking about it before. Because then and only then, with feeling married with data, can we actually get to a place of real change. And so I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, thank you. There's just so much to unpack in all of that. I'm just trying to, my brain is all over the place. I want to continue on, continue on. And as we're having these conversations about, inclusion and telling the true story, right, and understanding history and really facing some of these hard truths, I want to put that with these conversations that we hear corporations talk, right? We know about corporate speak, right? Innovation and, inclusion drives innovation, but nobody knows how those two things come together, right? I've yet to hear anyone talk about, okay, what's that path to that? And so, Janet, I want to come to you and ask, how can corporations position themselves to solve the challenges faced by these underrepresented communities by leveraging innovation and inclusion?
Innovation is going to happen whether you have diversity or not, to some extent. It can happen exponentially with diversity, but it will not happen if you don't have a way to take the innovation that is in people and put it into practice. And so much stops at getting from the brain and the heart and the hands into actually doing something. A lot of people stop it. Historical racism stops it. Structural racism stops it. A lot of things that stop it. One of the things that some companies are doing, which I think has some hope for it, is building like these innovation hubs. The benefit of a hub is that it pulls people out of the silos. If you have been sitting under a manager who never gave you a chance to see anything, do anything, never listened to your ideas, you're talking meetings, if you're in an innovation hub somewhere in the company where you're away from that manager or away from that structure, maybe you can be seen. Maybe your work can be viewed. Maybe you do get to work on projects. But like Carolyn was saying, the problem is we don't measure innovation in a way that accounts for diversity. We don't measure how an innovative solution how it got there. How did it get from the brain of a diverse individual to production and then the bottom line? If we aren't paying attention to who's working on what, to how they're promoted through the organization, to whether or not ideas are being listened to. You know, we say we have inclusion, you got a seat at the table. Well, you sit at the table and you're talking and nobody's doing anything with what you say, you know, whatever. So we don't put those kind of measures in place. But when we get to the point where we can track innovation and track it back to the source of it, and that source is diversity, which it invariably will be, then I think it's a whole lot easier in the business world to make the case, the true case for the value of diversity towards innovation. And then you get resources applied to it. Because, you know, as much, like it or not, if you're in the business world, it is about the bottom line. It is about value to shareholders. You know, if you want to do diversity because it's the right thing to do, go to church. You know, if you want to do it because it's the intellectually sound thing to do, study it. But if you're in business, the only reason anybody cares about diversity is because when it does to the bottom line. And to that end, if you are the diversity, we have to get to the point where we find ways to engage. I have an example. I worked with a pharmaceutical company, and they make HIV drugs. And their African-American BRG asked me to come in and do a workshop. And what we talked about was, I said, you know, I don't know a lot about this industry because I'm not in healthcare and I'm certainly not in pharmaceuticals, but I do know that the one demographic that is most affected by HIV/AIDS is heterosexual Black women. So if I'm talking to the BRG, I'm wondering where the solutions are that you're coming up with to help this company sell more medication into that demographic. So it works on both sides. And once again, I go back to you have to have structures. There had to be a BRG there. There had to be a way to get that innovation into the pipeline. And so if companies are serious about leveraging diversity and spending all this money on it and putting themselves out there to be attacked if they don't get it right, having employees mad at them and customers demanding things, if you're going to go through that much work, it is absolutely ridiculous that you don't build structures to get that innovation into implementation.
Okay, there was so much in that I want to just pull apart because, you know, two things. One, you know, when we talk about innovation, one of the hats that I wear is I talk a lot about psychological safety and the 4 stages of psychological safety, right? And so the third stage of psychological safety is contribution. And folks want people to contribute off the top. But we haven't gone through stage 1 and stage 2 yet. Like, I don't even feel included. So to your point, if I don't feel included and I have not, stage 2, learned anything about this culture, then you're not going to get the best contribution out of me. And if I feel threatened in that space, you're just going to get a checkbox, right? That's it, right? I'm just coming to get my paycheck. And so it's companies have to do that work on creating these environments that support that diverse talent that you're bringing in. Right. So that was kind of the first thing that you brought up. The second thing, you know, and I think this is a semantics to some degree, is you mentioned, you know, BRGs, right? Business resource groups. There's a fundamental difference between a business resource group and affinity group. And business resource groups tie back to the business, tie back to the communities, right? They are part of the work to say, okay, how can we build, grow, do for this community? Affinity groups, they're going to do happy hour. And I think that is a fundamental difference, because what is your company funding? Are they funding the happy hours? Are they funding and supporting your innovation? So those are the 2 things that kind of popped up in my head. Go ahead. I say you want to jump back in.
Well, and the reality is that you do need to know what the company's funding. And if they're funding you as a business resource group, you need to be a business resource. If you're in a family group, then that's fine too. And there's one in the middle is kind of employee resource groups. They're kind of sitting there in the middle of it.
Yep.
I mean, and the original ones that were formed, I think Xerox back in the 70s founded the first one. And it was an affinity group. It was a rowboat mentality, a lifeboat mentality. It's 5 of us in the middle of this. We need to get together and have some drinks. Okay. And there are plenty of companies where that lifeboat is still out there floating in those waters, and you need an affinity group. But you have to be clear about what it is. Because if the company gave you the money to be a business resource group and you're not a resource, they will keep out of guilt giving you money. But they will not build programs or systems to let you really develop and do and take advantage of it. And that's on the company, too.
Yeah.
And company, that's not just the people who are in that group. That's on the company. They're wasting their money if they're not doing the right thing.
If I can just jump in there for a second, because Sasha, kind of building on what excuse me, Janet said. You talked about psychological safety, right? And the stages or the rungs of innovation, and most importantly, threats, right? And so I think that we, and I'm watching the chat as we're talking, and when we talk about peeling back this onion, right? I think that we have to understand language that does threaten the psychological safety that, let's say you were at an organization and you built up over a certain time, and then something new is introduced, and then you feel like you are back right where you started. And a couple of those things are, how do you make sure that people want to contribute? Well, you make sure that they understand that they're valued. I'm going to say that again. You make sure that they understand that they are valued, right? How do you do that? By getting rid of things like fit, right? Because for me, when I hear fit, cultural fit, I'm like, deuces, I don't even want to work with you. Like, it is not even that serious, dude. Like, if that's the language we're going to use, it is so many other companies to work with for. But then there are all the other ways that you can make sure that people understand that they're valued. And to anybody who is questioning whether or not their organization values them, high potential, high performer, right? How are people telling you you contribute? You're going to progress through the organization. Are they mentoring you formally, not just coffee or a zip and Zoom, Zoom because it's COVID, but like, how are people pouring into you, right? How are they telling you that just because of your gender, your race, or your disability, seen or unseen orientation, that's not going to stop you from showing up, winning, and getting to the place that you may want to, or maybe you're comfortable where you are. But it's that type of language, right, that we have to be very mindful of. And we've got to stop making excuses for people in organizations that use it because we believe that they didn't mean it that way. Check them, explain to them that it's not right. And if they keep doing it, find somewhere else to work. And it's just that simple. Period. Full stop. Drop the mic, walk away.
I love it. Thank you.
I do too. I want to piggyback on so much. So much. We're gonna need another hour, y'all.
I know.
Is that gonna be like an after hours for this? Janet mentioned like we don't fully understand this connection between inclusion and diversity and innovation. But I would suggest that those of us who are in academics, like that's what we do. Like that's what I did for 10 years before I pivoted from being a professor to being this chief diversity officer. My PhD is in entrepreneurship. And we have decades and decades of scholarship around these things. The challenge is we don't do a good enough job of translating theory to practice. Academics talk to other academics. We take our research, we publish it in journals that oftentimes practitioners don't read, and vice versa. Practitioners don't reach out to academics, particularly academics of color who are doing this research, that have the lived experience, and allowing them to bring their research and teaching to bear on these issues that are in companies. And shameless plug for the PhD project, because this was the reason why this is the reason why I went from corporate. I was an engineer for 10 years at Bell South and AT&T until I found a PhD project, and they just opened my eyes to I could have being a professor as a career. And so through that engagement is why I transitioned from being an engineer to being an academic. And I love that. And I still love it, although I'm doing this new job now. But now it's allowing me to take the best of what I learned, that training that I got as an academic, as a researcher, as a scientist, and now marry that into actually making an impact in organizations. I think we need more of that, tying those two together. And I'm excited that, I'm now moving into from academic to corporate, but now my colleague, Atira Charles, who was a professor at FAMU, Rattler, strike, strike, strike again. Now she's a chief diversity officer for Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. Melissa Thomas Hunt, that was assistant provost, I think, at Vanderbilt, and now she's a chief diversity officer for Airbnb. We need more people to move from industry to industry because, to go back to what you said earlier, Janet, innovation lies between diverse ideas, and oftentimes those diverse ideas are held by people that have diverse experiences. And so the more we bring people together that have a myriad of backgrounds and expertise, that's how we really unlock the innovation. And the psychological safety is really the unlock. It's the cheat code to allow us to really get the innovation from bringing diverse people together. You can bring a whole bunch of diverse people together and put them in a group, but if they don't feel psychologically safe, nobody's going to challenge anybody's other ideas. Nobody's going to take a risk. They're just going to stay in their lane, stay in their hole, get their paycheck, and they go home. Or like Carolyn said, they'll leave and go somewhere else if they don't feel included or valued or psychologically safe at work.
Anthony, you just took right off my script because I was going to come to you next about that connection between business and academia, right? Like there's such a huge gap that's missing. And, you spoke to it so well around how the PhD project and programs like that, and there aren't no other programs like the PhD project really, that can pull that gap together because you're the ones that are in the classrooms with the next generation of business leaders, right? And so if they can start thinking about these things in the classroom and then go from theory into practice, right? The challenge is, how do you get this old school mentality that's in practice out the way? Because I think that's a big part of the key to unlocking some of this too, is that innovation is there. But again, it goes back to psychological safety. We've created these atmospheres where your idea is not good because you're new, or you are not welcome here. So, or your ideas are not welcome.
Insert the identity category because you're a female, because you're young, because you're older, because you're not heterosexual, because you're your religion, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so kind of just dropping, intersectionality, and they're all over again. But I want to throw this into the conversation because, again, Janet mentioned this earlier. When we talk about diversity, right, we minimize that, especially when we're collecting data. We look at gender and race, right? But there are so many other dimensions that we have to be thoughtful about, right? But let's just start with aligning definitions, because I think that's where we get caught up a lot too. And I just want to say, it burns me to my core that we have allowed diversity to really fall under gender, which means that when companies are talking about how great they are and all this other stuff, if you dig into it, if you look at these research reports, if you dig into the methodology, diversity equals gender, which means white women winning. And listen, I'm not mad. I'm not mad at that. I want everybody who deserves to win. But I don't want the research to only support the crossing of the finish line for some while others are being held back. So we just have to be mindful of that. So when people want to hit you with diversity information, make them unpack that. Make them tell you what they're talking about. That's one. Two, there are so many other threads that we have to pull through and sew through this conversation around diversity, and it is not just representation. For the DiversityInc Top 50 survey, for which KPMG, which is the supporter of the major supporter of the PhD project, one of DiversityInc's top 50 companies, there are 6 areas that we measure that if you pay attention to this, you won't get stuck on the representation conversation only. There are other places to look. So that is leadership accountability. We've been talking about that all day, but there are some very specific things that you can look at, see, and understand that leaders are doing or are not doing. And that's something that we really pay attention to. If people at the top don't want things to happen, short of a lawsuit or a mass walk-off or something along those lines, or a product flaw or a service flaw, it's just not going to happen. So leadership accountability is key. Workplace benefits. How are people being treated that work for the company that deliver that innovation? that deliver that competitive advantage. And when you think about Johnson & Johnson and the issues with medication that will go out on their time off and take drugs off the shelf because they believe in the company that they work for. Supplier diversity. How are you making sure that companies who are not yet today as big as you, but have aspirations to be, how as a large organization are you supporting them? And the last but certainly not least, philanthropy. Giving to people that are disadvantaged, not because of any fault of their own, but just because the color of their skin, the zip code, or who their parents are not. And so if you are just moving beyond representation and you are looking at all the other ways that diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging matter to a corporation, you have got a map, if you will, right there, just in the 6 areas we measured through our survey.
Can I pick it back?
Yeah, you go ahead, Anthony.
I'm just gonna say I'm in full mode right now. I have a much deeper appreciation of these awards and lists like Diversity Inc. And so right now my team is gathering all this data so that we can submit for Diversity Inc. But it really is a roadmap because I'm like, these are all the data points I need. And so now I'm reaching out to my people in procurement, in the charitable foundation, stuff like that. And it's really helping set the agenda, I think, in the strategy. And so now I'm like, this doesn't need to be a Herculean effort once a year that we gotta, now it's Diversity Inc. time, we gotta collect this. Like, how do we make this part of our regular reporting to our executive team, to our associates, but probably more importantly to our board of directors, because they need to understand how all these things tie together. Oftentimes when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we put it in just HR, but it's so much bigger than HR. It has to tie in to all these different things of the organization. So Carolyn, I really appreciate what you do, and I have a much deeper appreciation now that I'm on the other side, actually putting this stuff together.
Now, I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you to Kimberly. Diversity Inc. loves you too.
Well, it's true. It's truly a situation where, as an organization, if you're going to say that we have, and I always cringe at people who go back and forth between social justice or social equity. My thing is, what does social equity actually mean? Because I really don't know what that term means. Typically, when you are talking about stepping out of a history of inequity, what you're talking about is social justice. You are trying to balance the scales. But the word justice scares the hell out of a lot of companies. They think if you say justice, oh Lord, y'all gonna be in the streets. Well, whatever. But I mean, my point, so if you as a company have decided that you're gonna take a social justice position, you have to take it in every aspect of your company. Like you said, it's gotta be in your foundations. It's gotta be in what you do for your employees, inside your walls, outside your walls, in your communities, with your suppliers, everybody. It goes across the board. So I applaud you. Thank you for forcing companies that if they say if they want to lay claim to the title, they got to prove it. And I imagine it forces a lot of companies to have to look how they measure things, because they can't, like Anthony saying, you go ask them and you get oh, well, I don't know, we don't measure that. Well, next year, I'm gonna need you all to be able to measure this because I'm gonna be back asking you. And so I think things like, that kind of reporting are the things that help us move the needle. And if it takes an award for some companies to understand, so be it. Don't care why they do it, but certainly they shouldn't be able to lay claim to it, because a lot of them lay claim to a lot of things that don't require them to answer too much.
Yeah. I mean, I have to tell you, and it's why the survey is really a living, breathing intervention, right? Because you have a lot of people who are like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know that we could collect this information. I didn't even know that we have a free report card. You don't have to have a business relationship with us to get an understanding of where you are comparatively speaking. And that's the other thing. Listen, I am not mad at an organization that wants to outperform itself from last year, a year before that. And that's beautiful. But if you were not good to begin with, how's that working out for you, right? So it's about the comparison of best in class. And let us not fall into that trap of, well, it's about our industry. No, because I see people go from one industry to the next all the time. It's a talent war type of conversation. And if you don't understand where your leaky buckets are, where your issues around fairness, and most importantly, that legal, and I'm going to say this slowly, legal is stopping your organization from getting to the tip of the peak of ultimate innovation, because they will tell you, well, we can't collect it that way or do this or do that because it's discoverable. as leaders, we have to stop people from preventing us from gathering the information and then reporting back out and understanding and then planning so that we're successful and fair. And that's what our survey does, right?
Carolyn, that's a whole other conversation around,
it really
because
is.
I would put legal and HR, traditional HR, in that bucket.
And I like how you I like how you phrase that. It's traditional HR.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's industry specific. In some cases, it is leadership style specific. There are a lot of things that contribute to what gets in the way or propels. But
Yeah.
again, we have a voice and a choice. So you can stay at a company that you see these things working well in or not working so well in. You can stay if it's working, you can leave if it's not. But we just want you to have a roadmap to know what to look for. And that's really what the survey is about.
May I make a quick plug for the fact that when we are talking about, and this goes back to something Anthony was saying too about getting things into practice, I think it's a shame that you really don't have too many places where you can go and get some academic research and rigor around diversity, equity, and inclusion so that you can then take it back and have discussions with people based on science. Now, I work for a company now that is the whole thing. We're basically making organizations smarter, more human through science. That's one piece of it. But let's say I want to go get a PhD in diversity, equity, and inclusion, not because I'm just curious about it, but because I want to take it, I want to contribute to the research. I want to take that research and I want to go back in someplace to do it. There aren't that many places for me to do it. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to cobble it together. I'll have to figure out how to do it on my own. And that's why you end up with sort of these traditional views, because they're based on most HR departments, traditional HR departments. The people who are making the decisions have been in the company for a long time. They've been there for a while. Their goal is status quo. Their goal is to keep the lawyers over there and, and to some extent keep the press over there. And so that's not inclined to make you revolutionary. I am a firm believer that one of the things organizations need to look at is not necessarily pulling their chief diversity officers out of HR. Look other places for them. And not that it sounds self-serving, but I happen to think communicators make very great chief diversity officers because they communicate. You know what else they do? They call BS on a whole bunch of stuff.
Wow.
Because that's our job. A job as a communicator is going, no, that's not really true. I know what you said.
That's why I stayed in trouble. I know.
You know who else does that, Janet? Professors.
Exactly. Give me all the time. So I think that that's the problem. I mean, and then those CDO roles are new. That's a new thing to a lot of people, and it got really big last year when folks were trying to make some stuff happen. CDO got real popular, but there aren't too many places to go find them. There's no traditional route to find them. And usually, what happens is the loudest mouth minority, the loudest mouth person, whether they are LGBTQ, whether they're a woman, whether they're Black, Latino, whoever it is, whoever's got the loudest mouth that happens to be a diverse candidate sometimes gets that role. And they're not necessarily the person that ought to be in that role because people don't know where to go find them or what to do.
So if I can, and listen, I say yes to all of that. Communicators, academics, I say yes to all of that. But when I think about, like from a data perspective, when I think about DiversityInc's Hall of Fame, right? Those are the companies that ranked #1 since 2012. And even in years where they did not rank #1, they still performed as a top 10. If I think about that specific best-in-class group, I think about PricewaterhouseCoopers, I think about EY, I think about KPMG. The person or people that are cycling into those roles, mind you, and it is rotational. They are just not in it for 20 years. They are people who were in revenue generating roles. They know the business, they have respect amongst their peers. And I think that is an indicator of a true understanding of how this is not just a marketing or PR function for the company, but it is truly foundational to how you make your money, to how you are sustainable, to how you retain customers and how you take others from your competitors. And so if I had to give you an example of companies or even specifically industry I would tell you that professional services and then consulting, Accenture being that fifth cousin, right? I would tell you that they do this extremely well. And if you were looking to model, your Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Equity, and Belonging, I would also tell you HR has a function, and this job right now in the space that we are in this country has another. And so that person needs to be equally aligned and reporting to your CEO or your US lead. Otherwise, they will get pushed down, made quiet, and sent away until it's time to complete a diversity top 50 survey or something like it. So set people up to win. Don't set them up to fail and then blame them when a company that has issues well before they were probably even born, right? Because I'm 40, I identify as a millennial. So that's what it is. And so most people my age were being pulled into this direction, and they're not being set up to win. They're being placed in a department that has no interest in it. It's kind of like they just drew the shortest stick. If your company has intentions or plans, or even if you're looking to restructure, make sure you line people up to win, and a direct reporting connection, or even dotted line and access to the board, and resources. Resources, not just money, but an opportunity to have peer relationships with talent acquisition, with talent development, with the foundation, colleges and universities. Put these people in a situation to help you win. It's not about them, it's about all of us in this community that are doing this work. And this is not easy. We may look like we're having a good time. I'm watching the chat. I'll probably cry at some point between now and June, right? So
you will.
This is not easy, but we keep on smiling because we have the numbers and we know we're making progress. That's what helps me get up every day. But just put people in a position to succeed. That's all.
I think that's actually a great way for us to kind of wrap this up, because we have like 3 minutes left. So, Anthony or Jan, are there any final thoughts that you want to share as well?
I'll just leave it here. I'll say that, when as a company is trying to figure out what they're going to do with their diversity, equity, inclusion journey, I think companies have to ask what I call the central question: what does diversity solve for us? And if you're trying to figure out where to start, ask that question first. And then if you haven't done anything, if you can answer that question, what does diversity solve for us? And it's going to be different by each company. You can start building how you're going to get there. And when companies really understand and truly believe that there's value in diversity, stop talking about it, but actually being about it, they will build the structures and the pathways and the thoroughfares to get those problems solved. Real problems, real measures, and real consequences are just the basic way that any company can approach this and make it work.
And I would say that the PhD project is good ground. Since the murder of George Floyd, we've seen a lot of companies and philanthropists put a lot of money into initiatives that are supporting racial equity and social justice. And I would say the PhD project is good ground for that. I'm a beneficiary and a product of the PhD project. And there are thousands of folks just like me who come from underrepresented backgrounds. We have the knowledge, we do the research, we do the science, and majority of us had a career before we went to academia. We didn't come direct out of undergrad. We went and worked for an AT&T for a number of years. So we have that corporate understanding. We also have that academic understanding. So when you're thinking about bringing in consultants, I would say reach out to the PhD project, or heck, reach out to me, because I can help plug you into other people who can bring the theory and the practice to bear on solving some of these issues. So thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Carolyn. This has been an amazing panel. We could have gone for another hour, I'm sure. Thank you to the PhD Project for bringing this together. My name is Sasha Thompson. I'm with the Equity Equation. Thank you, and you all have a good evening, afternoon, and morning.
Thank you.